What does it really take to lose 30 pounds? A strong determination, a clean diet, a rigid workout routine, or perhaps a series of failed attempts that drags you down to the rock bottom again.
Or maybe it's addressing your stress hormone, cortisol. Cortisol is your main stress hormone, and if you're chronically stressed and your cortisol levels are chronically elevated, this can stall your weight loss in a major way. In this video, I will go over the top foods to eat to lower your cortisol levels. Hi, I'm Dr. Zaldivar, a nutrition professor who has taught for over a decade at the University of Miami and Miami-Dade College. I quit my teaching position so I could focus on coaching clients and creating online health information so I could reach a wider audience online. Now, why is it so important to lower cortisol levels? That's because there are three main things that high cortisol levels are going to lead to. First, cortisol will increase your appetite, especially for salty, fatty, and sugary foods. Think about it. The last time you were stressed, were you thinking about overeating broccoli? Or did the first thought that come to mind was a dessert or a bag of chips or pizza or some comfort food? That's because cortisol depletes your dopamine levels, and so the more cortisol you're releasing, the more you're burning through your dopamine in your brain, and now you're looking for an external source of dopamine in the form of a comfort food. Second, high cortisol levels will trigger your body to store more fat, particularly this lower belly fat or visceral fat. That's because your abdominal fat has more receptors for cortisol, so your lower belly area is far more sensitive to the effect of high cortisol levels than other areas in your body. This creates a vicious cycle. Stress leads to a cortisol spike, which leads to cravings and overeating, which increases abdominal body fat and overall weight gain, which stresses you out more, which leads to more cravings, and the cycle continues. So we need to learn how to break through that cycle. And third, cortisol raises your blood glucose levels, which can lead to insulin resistance, which can make weight loss very difficult. So what are these top foods that can help us lower our cortisol levels? The most important foods to include would be animal protein like meats, poultry, and seafood. Those foods help regulate your blood sugar. Because they don't have any carbohydrates, you don't have this blood glucose rise and drop all day long. Every time your blood glucose spikes, it stresses the body and leads to even more cortisol being released. And so by eliminating carbohydrates as much as possible, you're going to have a very stable blood glucose level throughout the whole day, which means cortisol levels remain low. This is why I love to include things like lobster, langostino. They're similar to shrimp, even though they're a form of lobster, bacon, cheeses, slow-cooked chicken, and chicken in all its forms, ground turkey, ground beef, eggs, cod, and the options really are unlimited. Another main category of foods would be to increase your fat intake. If you're animal-based, you can do animal sources of fat, such as butter, beef tallow, bacon, egg yolks, and all kinds of cheeses. Brie cheese, Swiss cheese, cream cheese, and the list goes on and on. If you're including plant foods, you can raise your fat intake by including things like nuts, like walnuts, avocados, olive oil, and coconut. If you're including nuts, you want to pay attention. If they are salted and roasted, sometimes that can make it more difficult to stick to a limited portion size. So if that describes you, then maybe it's best to get them unsalted and not roasted, so in their pure whole form. That way you wouldn't be encouraged to overeat, because the whole purpose of this video is to help you lower cortisol levels so you can maintain a lean physique. Another important food, which is not really a food, it's a nutrient, and that is increasing your magnesium intake. If you're following an animal-based approach, or specifically something like a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, you don't really have to worry as much about magnesium intake, because when you're not eating carbs, your body does not utilize all of your magnesium in your body as quickly. You need less magnesium basically on those lower carbohydrate diets. However, it's a good assurance just to add in an electrolyte powder or an electrolyte drink that will provide you with enough magnesium even on those diets. Now, if you are including plant foods, then I would recommend including magnesium-rich foods like dark chocolate, avocados, pumpkin seeds, dark green leafy vegetables, and broccoli. And also, since your microbiome plays a big role in the chronic levels of stress that you're introducing to your body, improving your microbiome health by including fermented foods is very helpful. So things that you can include would be pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha. A little disclaimer here, if you do have gut issues that are unresolved, you might not be able to tolerate those fermented foods in the beginning, or you may want to gradually increase your intake of those fermented foods until your microbiome becomes healthier. I would add that oftentimes it's what you do not eat that is far more powerful than what you do eat to lower cortisol levels. So limiting carbohydrates is one of the most important things you can do to stabilize your blood sugar, and by doing that, lowering your cortisol levels. Also, limiting alcohol and caffeine and added sugars are going to really lower your cortisol levels in the long term. Having said all that, the greatest and fastest improvements in having high levels of cortisol is going to come from, believe it or not, increasing the intensity of your workouts. That's right, I just told you to work out harder to lower your cortisol levels. That's because raising the intensity of your workouts is going to increase your baseline dopamine levels. Dopamine is your main anti-stress molecule. You never have high cortisol and high dopamine levels at the same time. You either have high cortisol, low dopamine, or vice versa. High dopamine and low cortisol. So the best way to ensure your cortisol levels remain low is by increasing your baseline dopamine, which means also increasing your overall natural production of dopamine at all times. So if you want to buffer yourself against the fattening and mentally draining effects of stress, I recommend raising your baseline dopamine levels as quickly as possible. And the most reliable way to raise your baseline dopamine levels is by raising progressively the intensity of your workouts, both with cardio and with strength training. Think of it this way. The faster you can run and the heavier the weights that you can lift equals the higher the number of your baseline dopamine level. So you are in complete control of what your baseline dopamine level can be. The more you raise your fitness level, the more you are raising your baseline dopamine levels. If you want a more detailed breakdown of this brain rehab protocol, or my protocol basically that raises your baseline dopamine levels, check out my guide, Dopamine Brain, on my website at drzaldivar.com/shop. There's another equally powerful way that I would recommend that you combine with the exercise, and that is visualizations. Energy versus training visualizations. Both types of these visualizations can also raise your baseline dopamine levels, and I break them down in my guide, Monster Mindset, also on my website, drzaldivar.com/shop. I would recommend buying the bundle instead of getting each guide individually, because you can get them both for the price of one when you purchase the bundle that contains both Dopamine Brain and Monster Mindset. And if you're looking for more individualized support, check out my one-on-one coaching packages on my website at drzaldivar.com/coaching. I've managed to lose 30 pounds and maintain them for years now, despite growing up with fat kid genetics, and I had struggled so much with binge eating, sugar addiction, low baseline dopamine, all the works, and finally I was able to overcome all of this. In part, it's because this was really the topic of my dissertation that I worked on for 6 years or 7 years really at the University of Miami. I learned how to use techniques to raise baseline dopamine levels, specifically to target weight loss and the ability to stick to a healthy lifestyle. I mentioned how low-carb diets can help you lower cortisol levels, so if you want an example of that, I will send you a free copy of my guide, the 30-Day Carnivore Diet Challenge Guide, when you sign up to my newsletter at drzaldivar.com/newsletter. And if you found this information helpful, please share it with your friends and family members who might benefit from this type of content. Also, to let me know that you're enjoying this type of content, give this YouTube video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that little noti bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.